Day 797 of the Ukrainian War Map, also known as the Russo-Ukrainian War. Juzzie here, and today is another update as I take a simplified and down-to-earth approach to some of the most important happenings on the ground in Ukraine. So, starting off, we'll take a look at the Russian losses, as currently Russia sits on more than 469,000 military personnel losses, representing an additional 1,120 in the past day. Then as for hardware losses, 5 tanks, 21 APVs, 13 artillery, and 1 air defense system. At least one, in fact there may have been a couple more not yet counted. Then we'll head across to the map as multiple Ukrainian attack drones penetrated deep into Russian territory, striking the Ryazan-located Rosneft oil refinery overnight. The strategic facility erupted in flames in the aftermath of the precision drone assault. And single-handedly, this location is responsible for 5% of all oil refining in Russia. As such, it's the third largest oil refinery in Russia on some metrics, and was in fact struck on March 13th by Ukrainian drones as well. According to sources, this strategic strike was by an operation conducted by Ukraine's defense intelligence. Local residents reported hearing a humming noise followed by 2 powerful explosions at around 3 a.m. The governor of Ryazan confirmed that several drones were shot down as they approached the area, although in this instance, authorities this time appeared to come clean and also state that a significant amount of damage was inflicted on this latest military target. Some things are just hard to deny. Then we move to the Kursk region of Russia as Ukrainian UAV drones hit and damaged 2 Russian Buk air defense systems in the region, in another incremental yet crippling blow to Russia's air defense capabilities, exposing vulnerabilities in their protective umbrella. Then headed into the Ukrainian map into the northeast as Ukrainian forces liberated a small piece of land in the Terny or Yampalivka region of the Crimea direction, which means that the Russian army's attempts to cut off Ukrainian forces by reaching all the way to the Zobets River looks less likely than ever now. Then headed a bit further south as Russian forces continue their efforts to bypass Chasiv Yar from the flanks of Bodanivka to the north and from Ivaniska to the south, but it's a lot easier said than done. With even specifically, if we zoom right in, here we go. So with this eastern urban detachment from the town of Chasiv Yar, but on the other side of the canal, still pretty much exclusively under the AFU's control. But it wasn't just a case of the AFU holding ground in this location, but also the capturing of a Russian BMP-1 with wicked cope cage, all in the process as well. Otherwise, no real changes to speak of on this axis still, even though Ukrainian sources report an uptick in Russian attacks compared to the Avdiivka direction, suggesting a potential shift in focus as Russia seeks to exploit its temporary advantage before US aid bolsters Ukrainian defenses completely. Then, speaking of the Avdiivka front, Russian forces pushed just beyond northern Osheretina, and we'll zoom in right there. Well, it's more of a case of extending to the next tree line, if we zoom in like that. But they are also doing this in concert with an adjacent town to the east, as Ukrainian Commander Fedorenko of the Achilles Drone Strike Battalion from the 92nd Assault Brigade warns that Russia is seizing a window of opportunity while it still can, as Ukrainian frontliners are in the process of re-equipping themselves with many tools of the frontline on their way. Then looking around, because somewhere in the east, in fact this one was in the south, a HIMARS rocket destroyed a Russian Buk air defense system in the Zaporizhia direction. Then we saw in the east how Ukrainian soldiers from the 44th Separate Artillery Brigade destroyed all manner of Russian equipment, from armoured vehicles to trucks to howitzers. It was hard to ID some of this stuff. There was just a lot of losses, as best as could be inferred. Then headed further down south, as most recently the armed forces of Ukraine have intensified their missile strikes on Russian-occupied Crimea, targeting key military installations. So in just a week and a half, the AFU launched attacks on Jankoy, Cape Tarnakut, and most recently, Simferopol. And during these 3 missile barrages, over 30 ATACMS, operational tactical missiles, were reportedly said to be deployed, with in the last day said to be 12 missiles rained down on the air bases of Jankoy and Vardaskoy, with the latter engulfed in flames. Now, although the exact launch sites remain unconfirmed, it is highly likely that the missiles originated from the Kherson region, as the AFU maintains this newfound yet unrelenting high volume and high yield pressure on Russian militarized sites. And specifically, Ukraine is making it untenable for the Russian forces to use those air bases, potentially having them mirror the abandonment, so the Russian forces mirroring the abandonment of the Berdyansk air base after its devastating ATACMS strikes last year, which had the knock-on effect of pushing Russian aviation further and further back. Then headed across to some news for the day. So Norway is set to bolster its support for Ukraine, pledging an additional 7 billion Norwegian kroners in aid, equal to roughly $650 million, bringing the total of the aid to 22 billion kroners. The Norwegian Prime Minister announced that the bulk of the funds will be directed towards fortifying Ukraine's anti-aircraft and artillery ammunition supplies. That's some very solid choices in terms of defense and offense. Then in some more hardware news updates, Ukraine has allocated an additional $300 million plus worth to bolster its drone arsenal, enabling the purchase of 300,000 unmanned aerial vehicles for the country's armed forces. Also note, Ukrainian Prime Minister Denis Shmyhal announced that this funding supplements the $1.1 billion already earmarked for drones in 2024 alone, as drones have played a pivotal role in Ukraine's defense against Russia's invasion, and President Zelensky has prioritized surpassing Russia in drone operations. As such, to support this goal, a separate branch of Ukraine's armed forces dedicated to drones was established in February just this year, focusing on creating specialized units, ramping up production, enhanced training, and driving their innovation in the sector. And with a current capacity to produce 150,000 drones monthly now, which is just staggering, Ukraine now aims to manufacture up to 2 million drones by year's end. Then in some more hardware news, Ukraine has received the second Skynex air defense system from Germany, a crucial addition to its most recently strained air defenses. So the Skynex, a networked system providing layered protection against various air threats, excels at shooting down drones very cost effectively. Now, by contrast, systems like the NASAMS, the IRIS-T, and Patriot can easily take out drones, but cost per engagement is high. And with Russia firing over 4,600 cheap Shahed drones to date into Ukraine, then using expensive missiles is just unsustainable. But Skynex helps to bridge this gap, and in particular, using the 35mm Oerlikon ahead rounds that disperse tungsten sub-projectiles at its target very efficiently. And I would venture a guess that although Ukraine only has 2 Skynex systems now, they likely protect high-value assets and may be crucial in keeping long-range missile systems operational. Germany's latest aid package also included 10 Marder IFVs, ammo for Leopard 2 tanks, and Gepard anti-aircraft guns, a radar, and other various equipment. Oh, and not to mention with a third Patriot system in the works. Then in some more Ukrainian hardware news, never a dull day for updates. So a Kharkiv-based businessman, once a plastic container manufacturer, has shifted gears to produce long-range drones in western Ukraine, answering the country's urgent need for these weapons. Because as the backstory goes, in the summer of 2023, Ukraine security services approached him with a drone prototype, seeking his ability to replicate it. And despite no experience in drone warfare, he used his plastics manufacturing know-how and assembled a team of 75, including one former Soviet aviation industry veteran, to establish a production line. The process involves molding fiberglass mesh into wings, tail fins, and noses, which are then assembled into small aircraft with 2-meter wingspans. Naturally, engines and payloads are installed separately elsewhere for safety. So, safe to guess, this story is likely just one of many engagements between government and private industry to step up and produce on a war footing. Then in some more news, a surge of Ukrainian strikes targeting oil refineries deep within Russian territory has plunged the world's largest country into a petrol crisis, as reported by Politico. Russian consumers are grappling with skyrocketing fuel prices, with diesel costs soaring nearly 10% in the past week alone, according to official government data as well. But to add to that, petrol prices have also reached a 6-month peak, climbing more than 20% since the beginning of the year. And so, as we can see, the devastating impact of the precision drone assaults on Russia's critical energy infrastructure has exposed vulnerabilities in the nation's fuel supply chain, leaving ordinary citizens to bear the brunt of the economic fallout. And it's important to understand a bit of context here, a bit of extra context, as Russia's fuel prices traditionally flatlined over the past 5 to 8 years, so a 20% increase is quite relevant for Russian citizens, who some are probably scratching their heads thinking this is clearly due to little president but big ego Putin starting a sham invasion into Ukraine in a very miscalculated fashion. Then headed across to another Russian military mobilization blunder segment as Russian authorities continue their hunt for migrants to add to the ranks of their military. For instance, in a recent raid on a market in the Leninsky district of Krasnoyarsk of central Russia, police detained 135 foreign citizens, including immigrants from Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, and Uzbekistan. The detainees were subjected to background checks, criminal record searches, and epithelial samples. Ew. Well, epithelial samples are like tiny pieces from top layers of your skin, or more commonly, the inside lining of your mouth, a mouth swab. So I would think that Russian authorities are doing this so that the outside world thinks it's all above board, in terms of health screening or health-based compliance for the migrant work that they do, but above board it never is, because they found a number of these recently naturalized Russian citizens who were then, surprise surprise, issued military registration notices, while others faced deportation from the country or joining a Russian war, with what I would expect to be a lot of coercion on that front from what we've seen and heard before. But the thing is, Russia is already dealing with a massive workforce labor shortage. So by taking actions like these, they're just making it look much less desirable for migrant workers to travel to Russia for short-term work. So it would continue to appear that Russia is just tearing down its economy piece by piece. Then headed across to a quick funny to round it all off today, guys. So remember Russia's capture of a Leopard 2 tank last year, I believe? Well, as it turns out, that tank might be the most technologically advanced tank at the Russian Military Victory Day Parade next week. But also, looks like they want to give it a bit of a haircut before next week, using a crane with a heavy weight to bend or break the cannon, or otherwise make it look less formidable, I suppose. So when Russians have to artificially manipulate an enemy tank to make it look non-threatening, you just know that they are coping so hard. But either way, we all knew they had to do something to make this year's event look more passable than last year's embarrassing event. After all, propaganda is one of their best weapons. So it appears that this year's act is putting on display captured enemy equipment, which means we'll see a handful of Humvees, a few Western MRAPs, a tank like this one, and from memory a destroyed Abrams as well. Destroyed and captured, and some M113 armoured personnel carriers. And so all of this is quite part and parcel for conflicts. Take for example Ukraine. They captured more Russian tanks, about 550 on my last check, than what exists and is operational in any other European nation's army. 550! And add to that, putting on display enemy vehicles is right out of the Ukrainian playbook. Only difference is Ukraine did it so many seasons ago with a lot of destroyed Russian equipment, mostly just leftover hulls, after Russia's withdrawal from the Ukrainian capital a while back. But there's also a further asymmetry here that you should realize, because Ukraine can repair and run both Soviet and Western vehicles, but Russia cannot. Sure, you might see them cruise around in an MRAP, but they're not really trained for it and they can't do it on such large scale. So as for this upcoming Russian military Victory Day parade, well, if all this makes Putin feel invincible, then sure, let the baby have his bottle. So that's it for today, guys. Thanks again for watching. Please continue to like, comment, and subscribe. And I do hope to see all of you guys there in the next one. Cheers.